I was with Jerry. Well, I was at the Third Monday workshop Monday, and saw Jerry. He asked about you all. I told him we talked about him every once in a while. We tried to say nice things, but anyway, he's doing well. He said everybody's weird as far as if you shit. That's a terrible place to put a period, isn't it? Everybody is going through, all congregations are going through strange things. Of course, you all went through with Jerry what I've only read about in Jerry's writings and found out through talking to Jerry. Because I've known Jerry for many years now. And, but anyway, he was saying that he's been with this congregation since March, April, May, maybe the 1st of May, and he hasn't started his committee meetings till either last week or next week. I forgot which one he said. And so he said, it's just strange. It's just, well, he used the word weird. Thank you, Missy. Turn your Bibles to Mark chapter 6. I'll look beginning in verse 45. Mark chapter 6, beginning in verse 45 is where we are in our study. And hope that it will prove beneficial to you. I gave you an assignment over the telephone last week. I hope you thought about it. If you didn't, I'm going to tell you what your assignment is, and in just a few minutes I'm going to get to it. But so if you haven't thought about it, you'll have time to think about it before then. The question really, it was a two-part question. What is your favorite verse or your go-to verse or your rock, if you will, verse that gets you through a difficult time? And then not only a verse, but what's your favorite song? Now, when we get to that point, Suze, if you will, write all those down. I have a reason I'll explain, but I'd appreciate it. We're in Mark chapter 6. You ever been scared? You ever been afraid? What caused you to be afraid? Unknown? The dark? Finances. Children. Yeah. Yeah. Anything else? A lot of things. We're afraid of. We have fears. We're basically only born with two phobias or two fears. Fear of noise and the fear of falling. And we develop fears in our life. And there are literally thousands, psychologists tell us thousands of fears. I saw a list, this has been quite a few years ago, and it was over 6,000 fears at that time. And so there's more added periodically, and there's been more added since then. But there's a time here in which certain of the followers of Jesus, the apostles, were afraid. And we'll see that in just a minute. Fear is a motivator. Fear is also an inhibitor. But we'll see what happens with regards to them. Let's think what we studied last week. Last week we studied, we kind of took off a subject of decisions, but we studied about the feeding of the 5,000. 5 loaves, 2 fishes, little boy, and Jesus performed that miracle. The book of Mark is all about the action of Jesus, what he did. And it's about miracles, really, in many ways, up to this point. He talks a lot about miracles, and even at the end of what we're going to study tonight, this chapter, he kind of just mentions a lot of things happened that he just mentions them in passing. And so Jesus evidently performed a lot of miracles that we're not familiar with. But that's understandable, because when you stop and think about Jesus' public ministry was just for 3 years. And we really only have about, depending on whose list you want to look at and who's counting, anywhere from 12 to 20 days of the life of Christ recorded. And we don't have all the events of even those days recorded. So we don't have, everything Jesus did. Jesus did a lot. But getting back to the main subject of fear, Jesus has fed the 5,000. There was always, as we've talked about so many times, there was always this throng of people around Jesus. And it says immediately He made His disciples get into the boat and go before Him to the other side, to Bethsaida, while He sent the multitude away. And when He had sent them away, He departed to the mountain to pray. And when evening came, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and He was alone on the land. And He saw them straining at rowing, for the wind was against them. Now about the fourth watch of the night, He came to them, walking on the sea, and would have passed them by. And when they saw Him walking on the sea, they supposed it was a ghost, and cried out. For they all saw Him, and were troubled. But immediately He talked with them, and said to them, Be of good cheer, it is I, do not be afraid. When He went up into the boat to them, the wind ceased, and they were greatly amazed in themselves beyond measure, and marveled. For they had not understood about the loaves, because their heart was hardened. There's a lot there. Let's kind of break that text down, if you don't mind, and then we will find some lessons in it. Notice, first of all, what's the first word in verse 45? And I'm using the New King James. Immediately. Anybody else got anything different? Straightway. So in other words, this happens right after the feeding of the 5,000. Now this is also found in the book of Matthew, the 14th chapter, and also in John, the 6th chapter. And there's more in it, especially in Matthew, than there is in Mark's account. And so I'm going to throw in a couple of things from Matthew, not many, because I like to stay with the text of which we're studying at the point in time or it gets confusing. But immediately after the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus says, okay, we need to get into a boat, we need to go away. Jesus was as much about getting away from the people as He was being in the midst of the people. Because, think about it, this is at the close of the day. This is at the end of the day. Because, remember, it was towards the end of the day, Jesus fed the 5,000. Remember, He had them because it was, as the text said, it was late in the day and they had not eaten. And that's why He fed them. And so, late in the day, and I'll show you how in just a minute how we can get that, Jesus sent the multitude away, but He decided to go and tell the apostles with Him, let's go to the other side, or let's go across. Let's go to Bethsaida. And as they go, they end up in the midst of a storm. Now, if you think about where Jesus was with regards to the Sea of Galilee, not with regards to whether He was traveling east or west or north or south. But if you look in the back of your Bibles, or if you recall the maps with regards to Israel, you have the sea really off to the west, right? And then you have what would be a small bit of land, and then you have the Sea of Galilee. Well, on the east side of the Sea of Galilee, there's a lot of mountains. There are a few, but not as high on the west side as they are on the east side of the Sea of Galilee. And prevailing winds that come off the ocean come across, and they come across the Sea of Galilee, and they hit these mountains. And they in turn drive the wind back upon the Sea of Galilee. And so you have very turbulent storms on the Sea of Galilee. And this is one of them. It's sort of like, I don't know if you all know this, and you probably do, you probably know it better than I do, but I talked to somebody years ago when I was living actually in Waverly. When you come from West Tennessee, you come across the river, especially in Waverly, in that area. The terrain is lower, and as you cross the river, it rises. And that's why if you ever follow weather, if it's coming from West Tennessee and it's coming up, so to speak, 70, And if you follow it and you have people in that direction, you'll find out a lot of times New Johnsonville and Waverly will not get rain, but Dixon and the rest of us this way will get rain. It's because as the winds hit and as the land moves up, it has an updraft. And that's why a lot of times it skips New Johnsonville and Waverly. Now, that's from somebody that knows, okay? And I don't know, but that's from that information. So what I'm trying to show you is that topography, ground, has a lot of influence. Well, it does with regards to the Sea of Galilee. The winds, prevailing winds come off the oceans, they hit these mountains, they come back down, and it's very turbulent. Well, this is a time in which it's very turbulent. It's evening, verse 47 says. The boat is in the middle of the sea, and he was alone on the land. Evening. When is evening? Anybody want to guess when evening was? Anytime after dark. Anytime after dark. That's fine with me. Yeah. The watches themselves began, you had the first watch that began from 6 to 9. And then you had the second watch that was from 9 to 12. You had the third watch that was 12 to 3. And the fourth watch that was from 3 to 6. This all at night when it got dark. And so about that time, about, 6 to 8, 9 o'clock, were some guess. And nevertheless, they have already by this time gotten to the middle of the sea. Jesus, though, is alone. Jesus was alone for what purpose? Prayer. I think this is interesting. Now you may not. I think this is interesting in Mark, that Mark is all about what Jesus did. And he mentions the fact that Jesus prayed, which is something Jesus did. And while we have some of the prayers of Jesus, and that makes for an excellent series of lessons, it is interesting to think about the fact that there were times that Jesus would send the multitude away so that he could simply talk to the Father. And this is one of those times. But verse 48 says, Jesus saw them straining at rowing, for the wind was against them. Jesus saw it. I don't know exactly how. Maybe it was daylight savings time. Maybe it was he saw them from the standpoint of lightning because it was a storm. Maybe it was because it just wasn't good and dark yet. I don't know. But Jesus saw them. But now about the fourth watch of the night. Now the fourth watch, remember how we divided it? The fourth watch would be from 3 in the morning to 6 at night. So somewhere between 3 in the morning and 6 in the morning, excuse me. Not 6 at night. 3 in the morning to 6 in the morning. Get it right in a minute. Early. That's before, that's about getting up time, I guess. Jesus sees them and Jesus comes walking on the sea and would have passed by them. Does somebody's read a little differently? Yeah. Yeah, and there are versions that say that. Yeah. The intent of the Scriptures, if you look at them, what is in the Greek text, what it literally says is that as he was coming upon them, as if he were going to pass them, not that he was intending on passing. But there are versions, I knew there were versions that seemed to read that, he meant to pass them by. And then that would raise this question, well, why would he do that? Right? Well, probably he just was coming up to them. And as he comes up to them, notice here's what happens, verse 49. He saw them. They supposed what? What did they suppose they were seeing? A ghost. You ever seen a ghost? You ever seen Casper? You ever watched cartoon Casper? Seen a ghost? I've seen people that look like ghosts, or we say, oh man, you look like a ghost. So white. Something's wrong with you. Ghosts, spirit apparitions, that was something that in New Testament times was a common belief. That there were ghosts, you saw ghosts, doo-dah, doo-dah. My take on ghosts, we'll talk about that privately. I've been scared by things, but I don't necessarily know that I've seen any ghosts. But they thought that they had seen a ghost. And so they cried out. They were afraid. For they all saw him and were troubled. What does some other versions have? Terrified. Yeah, the word is tarasso, which has the word of afraid or terror. They were afraid. And so, immediately, we see that word again. He, Jesus, talked with them, and He reassured them. He comforted them. Be of good cheer. Now, this is not the only time Jesus uses this terminology, but it's the idea of, it's all right. Be of good cheer. I'm here. It's me. It's I. Do not be afraid. And then He went up into the boat to them. The wind stopped, and they were amazed. Now, I don't know about you, but that, for me, just in casual reading, if I were to stop right there without knowing what's coming up in the next couple of verses, would cause me to scratch my head, right? Why? Why would that cause anybody to scratch their head? If you think about it this way, let me rephrase that and let me re-enter that question a different way. If you had never read this story, and you had never read the Bible, you hadn't read Matthew's account, you hadn't read John's account, and you hadn't read this account, and you're reading this account for the very first time, and this account, I mean Mark. You're reading the book of Mark for the first time. They see Jesus walking on the water, and they are afraid, and yet they are amazed to see Him walking on the water and also to see the winds cease. They are astonished. What's so different about that? This wasn't the first miracle that they had seen by any stretch of the imagination. They had just seen the feeding of the 5,000. And they had been a party to, if you stop and think about it. It's not just a matter of they had seen it, right? But who were the ones that were passing out the 5 loaves and 2 fishes? It was them, right? It was them. They were the ones that were. They were not just standing back and watching Jesus, lay hands on somebody and giving them sight, or picking a man up and giving his feet and ankles strength and being able to walk. They were the ones that every time they reached in their basket, there was more there, and so they were passing out to people food. And each time they reached in, there was more fish and there was more bread. And then they were the ones, more than likely. Text doesn't just precisely say, but it says they, so I think I'm safe in that assumption. They were the ones that gathered up the 12 baskets that were left over, the fragments. They were in the middle of all this. And so it just seems strange to me that these folks marvel at the fact that Jesus is walking to them on water, and Jesus gets in the boat with them, and the wind ceased. Now, let's stop right here, and let's add something to the lesson. Matthew's account, there's something else that happens before Jesus gets in the boat. Do you recall what it is? Peter walking on the water. Let's add that for just a minute. Like I say, I like to stay with text because it gets confusing, especially when you got Matthew and Mark and John's account. Peter, when he sees Jesus before he gets into the boat, when Jesus says, "It is I, be of good cheer, it is I," Peter says what? "Lord, if it's you, let me what? Let me come to you." What does Jesus say? He said, come on. He didn't say, no. This is just me. I can only do this. Come on. Peter gets out of the boat. And for me, in that story, and there's a lot of things in it, and we'll save it for sermons and other Bible classes later. For me, it's interesting because it's a man that has faith enough to get out of the boat, but not enough faith to sustain him in a walk to Jesus. And so you say, well, what's the problem there? Well, the problem is that, do you recall why he begins to sink? What happens? What does he do? Took his eyes off of Jesus and began to look at what was going on around him and what was happening. And he sinks, right? And Jesus lifts him up out of the water. Better put that up where I can see it. Jesus lifts him up out of the water, and they both then get into the boat. It is then that we come back. Now let's come back to Mark's account. That they get in the boat and everything ceases. And verse 52 says, for they had not understood about the loaves because their heart was hardened. You ever had people tell you, if a miracle was performed in so-and-so's sight, they would believe? You ever had that? Ever been told that? I have. By the way, I have. Man, if I see a miracle, I believe. Well, first of all, the answer is found in the story of the rich man Lazarus. And remember when he wanted to go back, go back and talk to my brothers. Let them see a miracle. And remember, they're reminded they have Moses and the prophets. They have the text. They have the scriptures. Let them hear them. Seeing helps us in our faith, doesn't it? What state is known as the Show Me State? Missouri. Missouri, whatever, how you say it. Missouri is the Show Me State. There's nothing wrong with that. Faith is aided by what it sees, right? These folks had a hard time believing. Why? What does the text say? Their hearts were hardened. True faith does what? It opens the heart. Lord, you say it, I believe it. You know the old saying, if the Bible says it, I believe it, that finishes it. Now that's a bad saying. The saying should be, if the Bible says it, that finishes it. But faith opens the heart and says, okay, what do you want me to believe? What do you want me to see? What do you want me to understand? And how do you want me to live? Their faith was, for whatever reason, closed off. But their faith was closed off because they'd hardened their hearts. The Hebrew writer in Hebrews chapter 4 talks about, let us therefore fear lest a promise being left us of entering into His rest, any of us should come short of it. And he talks about in verse 2 and then in verse 3 that there were some that will fall short of that rest. And the reason being because of the things that they saw and the things that they believed were not mixed with faith. And so it takes something, and it takes faith. Now, we don't have Jesus, and we don't have Him walking on the water. But what do we have that develops, hones, and produces our faith? That's not it, by the way. The Bible. But what else? The Bible is number one, but what else do we have? I hope you'll think about this. We have life's experiences that, if put with the Bible, will build our faith And so we should look and listen to the Scriptures. And that will build and produce, or produce and then build our faith. Okay? Well, what lessons can we learn? Well, let's talk about a couple of things. Let's first of all mention the fact that Revelation is right, of course. But Jesus is Jesus. And one of the things Jesus does with regard to the apostles here is He protects them. That's a great lesson to learn. Last week when we studied the feeding of the 5,000, what did Jesus do for the people? It starts with a P. You're supposed to be reading my mind. He provided for them, right? This text tells us He protects us. In Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 6, the Hebrew writer says, so that we may boldly say, the Lord is my what? You remember the text there? The Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What shall man do to me? The Lord's our helper. The Lord will get us through. The Lord will carry us through. Jesus is Jesus, and Jesus being Jesus will protect us as we go through life. That leads us then to the second point, and I hope maybe you've been giving this some thought. And that is found in verse 50. The encouragement that Jesus gives us. Now, like I say, this was not the only time. Jesus, on about 4 occasions, gave really what you might call, actually more than that, depends on how you look at some text. But Jesus gave encouragement. He gave encouragement to different ones for different things. The paralytic in Matthew chapter 9, he says, take heart. He gave Bartimaeus, we'll see in a few chapters over in the 10th chapter of the book of Mark, he'll talk to him about be of good cheer. In chapter 14, verse 1, I think there's an encouraging text there. Let not your hearts be troubled. Remember that text? I think that's an encouraging text. It's not easy to go through life. These folks in this boat were going through a storm. You've heard me talk about, over the telephone, you've heard me talk about, you've heard other preachers talk about, that there's always a storm in our life. We're either going towards a storm, we're in the midst of the storm, or we're coming out of the storm, and as we're coming out of it, we're headed towards another storm. There's always a storm in our life. But as Christians, there's calm in the midst of the storm. What are, Suzanne, this is where you start writing, honey. What are the verses that become your source of encouragement in the midst of your storm? Don't all mention them at once, because you can't write but one at a time.
I chose Psalms 56:4, which says basically what Hebrews 13:6 says.
Yeah.
It says, in God I put my trust, I will not fear what can man do to me.
Yeah. It's a good one. What else?
Like Philippians 4:13.
Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. By the way, let me just go ahead. 23rd Psalm's an excellent one. I'm making this list. Let me give a disclaimer. I'm making this list so that probably sometime next year I'm probably going to preach from this list, okay? So I'll make a disclaimer now. So you're helping me, okay? What else? Rejoice and be glad in it. Yeah, that's a good one. 1:18:24. What else? Yeah. Absolutely. Be still and know that I am God. There you go. Psalm 46:10. Yeah, 46:10. Be still. And I don't think we really understand that one phrase, that verse. All right, let me back that statement up. I have the hardest part. That's the hardest part of that verse for me. Be still. Be still. I won't tell you the rest because I may preach a sermon on it. What else? Anybody else? Yeah, it is a good one. George? James 4. That's a good one. What else? Suze, what's yours? Yeah, I predicted that in my head. Proverbs 3. 1 Peter 5:7, cast all your care upon him, for he cares for you. Psalm 46:1, the Lord's our refuge and strength. Psalm 18:1, the Lord's my strength, my high tower, and in him will I trust. That's also found in 2 Samuel 22, I believe. What else? Anybody else? Well, if you think of one, or those of you that are listening over the telephone, if you want to call me or send me a note or ever how you want to get a hold of me, it's fine. And send me your favorite verse, and I'll probably next year I'll ask for. But verses that keep us calm in the midst of calm or in the midst of storms, those are some good ones. Now, how about songs? Songs, S-O-N-G-S. That's what I'm trying to say. If you don't understand my accent. Okay, well, go ahead. Let the lower lights be burning. Yeah. Be with me, Lord. Teach me, Lord, the way. Shelter in time of storm.
You gotta slow down for a minute.
This is Ralph Gilmore's class. That's why I can't write anymore. He ruined me in college. Yeah. Okay, y'all repeat. Let's Lord. Be with me, Lord. Oh, that's all. Well, we had 10. Yeah, that's true. I can go back. Anyway, what else? Pass me not. Oh, man, I hadn't sung that in a long time. Right now, I'm on. I'll let you. Y'all keep thinking. I'll let you stop for just a second. I'm on a kick right now. You can go on YouTube, and I don't know if you all are familiar with Ray Walker. Ray's a buddy of mine. Has been because he led singing for years at Waverly, and we got to know him there. And I am probably one of a lot of people that he called Sonny, but he calls me Sonny when he sees me. Anyway, I'm on a kick. You can get on YouTube and you can just listen to. He's done about 16, I think, different CDs out in Dallas, Texas, with Preston Crest and some other places. And you can just turn it on and it's on a repeater. And last week, a couple of days last week, and yesterday, I think, I got on it, and while I was working on sermons and all, I could just hear that congregational singing, and it's some of these songs. So, just a plug for Ray, I guess. But anyway, what's some other songs? How Great Thou Art. Yeah. What else? The Church in the Wildwood. Yeah. That is a good one. Anybody got another one? Yeah. That's a great one. Then Amazing Grace. Yes, ma'am. And hold to God's unchanging hand. Anyone else? Well, those help us through difficult times, don't they? Those verses, those songs, they help us through. And they become, in essence, the Lord speaking to us, saying in the midst of our scary times, be of good cheer. And that's what gets us through. Well, then let's look at one other idea. Well, actually, I've got a couple of ideas, but verse 51 and 52, we need to have a receptive heart. We need to have an open heart. What we find in the Bible needs to move us. And we need to study the Bible with the idea of... Is that Star Wars? We need to study the Bible with the idea of letting the Bible speak to us instead of speaking to the Bible. So many times in our Bible studies, and I hope to probably... Well, it'll be when we start back in Bible classes, probably on Sunday morning. I'm going to spend 4 weeks or so, Lord willing, talking about how to study the Bible. Just the way I study it. Hopefully it will help you. But we need to let the Bible speak to us instead of trying to figure things out and then go to the Bible. And in doing that, we're open. These folks weren't open. They weren't open for many different reasons. They were looking for a physical king. What we studied here a few weeks ago on Wednesday night, that a prophet is without honor save in his own country. Jesus realized that folks, they saw him. Do you know anybody that is well-to-do, that you've known them for a long time? Now, well-to-do, I realize, is by definition, everybody has a different definition of well-to-do. But at the same time, too, somebody that has done well. And there are folks that respect them for where they are or what they've accomplished. But you just think of them as old so-and-so because you were there, you changed their diapers. Or you've known them ever since they were little, right? Well, Jesus had that problem. There were those that had seen him running around as a child. And now to see him as Savior, they had a difficult time. There were other reasons, I believe, that their heart was hardened, and some of it will be revealed as we get into the book of Mark. But they're beginning to see that Jesus was the Christ. They're beginning to open their eyes. May our eyes always be open. But then I want us to look at verse 53 through verse 56 and come up with one more lesson, and then I've gone too long as it is anyway. But when they crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret and anchored there. And when they came out of the boat, immediately the people recognized him, ran through that whole surrounding region, and began to carry about on beds those who were sick to wherever they heard he was. Wherever he entered, into villages, cities, or the country, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that they might just touch the hem of his garment. And as many as touched him were made well. Jesus performed many other miracles. These folks believed that he could make a difference in their lives. And so ultimately, here's the point that I want to make about these folks. Their faith was rewarded. They believed that Jesus could heal them. And you might say, well, maybe some of them had gotten to the point where it wasn't a matter of Jesus could heal them, but they had run out of options, so why not try Jesus? Well, sure, but they had enough faith to say, this man can do it. Let's bring old Aunt so-and-so. Let's bring Uncle so-and-so. Let's bring Granddad so-and-so. Let's bring Grandmom. Let's bring Mom. Let's bring Dad. Let's bring brother. Let's bring sister. And all we got to do is touch the hem of his garment. Their faith, their belief is rewarded. Our faith will be rewarded. All we have to do is not have that heart of heart, but have eyes that are open. And we'll listen to the Lord and lean upon him. And he will carry us through. If you walk away with nothing else tonight, if you walk away with that thought, that image from this text, you've gained, I think, a lot. And so let us always lean upon the Lord and keep our eyes and our ears open to the truth and to what He's told us. Anything else anybody'd like to say? I got an assignment for next week to give you, but anything anybody'd like to say, ask, or put in? Well, next week we're going to study the 7th chapter, beginning in verse 1, go through verse 23. Here's your assignment. Think about traditions that you have, either individually or as a family. And be willing to share with us. You don't have to, but if you would, we'd like to hear them. Traditions. I'll tell you one right now, and I'll give you some more information about it next week. But we have, Suzanne and I have a family tradition with Ethan and now with Kara, although Kara doesn't like it as much. But one of the things that we do on Christmas Eve, if we're together on Christmas Eve with them, and if we're not, then whenever we celebrate Christmas, the weekend we get to celebrate Christmas together, the Saturday night, we have a country ham breakfast. That's our family. That's one of many family traditions. So that's kind of the thinking. Just traditions that, nobody's making you do, but just that you do. Think about that this week. And then we'll tie that in with what's being mentioned in the first 23 verses of Mark chapter 7. Anything else? Well, thank you for coming. Let's bow for a word of prayer, but let me say thank you for coming. Sunday morning we're going to talk about winning over pride, and we hope you'll be here or you'll be able to listen to it. We know you'll be able to, but you will listen to it if you're not able to be here. And then Sunday night, we're going to discuss over the telephone, we're going to discuss the presence of God from a standpoint of how that strengthens us, our faith, and our life.